move on to the next thing, which is Conor himself. And kind of this upcoming Poirier fight, where I think Conor stands, and like, you see a lot of the talking heads on ESPN and Fox Sports and all that stuff talking about how Conor has no reason to come back. If he's already so great. He's won the title in 2 different weight classes, and he's the richest fighter ever, at least MMA fighter ever. He's made so much money. He just made another, I think it was like $600 million or something ridiculous by selling his whiskey company, or his share in his whiskey company. And they look at that and they say, like, why would he come back and fight, right? And I think for Conor, it really depends. If he's coming back to fight for the money, that really doesn't make any sense, right? He's already such a superstar. At this point, I'd be surprised if he's not already close to a billionaire, if not over $1 billion, depending on, he spends a lot of money, so he might not be over $1 billion, but over his career, I'd be surprised if he hasn't earned at least $1 billion. He's just spent a lot of it. So, he's getting close to being a billionaire now. And so for the money, it really doesn't make sense to come back and fight, right? Like, if you come back to the UFC, you fight. The Poirier fight, you'll probably make... The Poirier fight, he might make like a couple $100 million. I don't know what his show money is. I think he gets like 15 or 20 million to show. And then he'll get a cut of the pay-per-view. But... so he might make $100 or $200 million depending on how many pay-per-views that sells, which is a decent chunk of money. But if he loses that, then he's never going to make that kind of money again, or like not. He'll make good money, but he won't make that kind of money again. Whereas if he wins, he will come back and make a lot of money, and he could start, like, if he's able to regain that title, and regain the featherweight title as well, or possibly even move up and challenge Usman. A lot of those fights could make him a fuckload of money. So there is still money for him to be made, But I think more importantly than the money for McGregor is the legacy. Because if you look at the guys to hold the featherweight title, so you had Jose Aldo, who he was actually promoted from WEC when Zuffa merged the 2 organizations. They owned both at the time, so the UFC absorbed WEC, and at the time, WEC had the best 145-pounders and 135-pounders in the world, so their champions became the new champions. So he was actually, his 7 defenses were actually his first 7 title wins, and then he came back, regained the interim title, and then was promoted again, never unified in a fight. So essentially, Jose Aldo has 8 title wins. Then you move on to Max Holloway, who has the second most ever. He won the interim title during Aldo's second reign, and then he unified the title against Aldo, and then he defended it 3 times, including a win over Aldo and a win over Edgar. And then if you move on to Volkanovski, he's beat Max for the title and then defended against Max. So all of those guys have, 8 title wins for Aldo, 5 title wins for Holloway, so far 2 for Volkanovski, and then you have McGregor, who won the belt and then never defended it. If you count his interim belt, that is another win for him, so he's tied with Volkanovski for the least ever, but Volkanovski being the current champion, the next time he goes to defend that belt, if he's able to successfully defend it, he will beat McGregor, and that'll put McGregor into the category of essentially the worst featherweight champion ever. And I don't think that's a category that McGregor wants to be in, right? Because it's one thing for the casual fans to be like, oh yeah, McGregor, I used to watch his fights all the time. But for a guy like McGregor, he does want that, but he also wants the recognition from the hardcore fans that he's one of the best to ever do it. So in order for him to do that at featherweight specifically, I don't know if he'll ever even go back down to featherweight, but at featherweight, he'd have to win the title again. And then he'd probably have to beat Aldo and Holloway again, because he's already beat both of them. And then he'd probably have to beat Volkanovski. But he would definitely have to go back and win that title again, because right now the fact that he was just kind of a one-and-done champion, 2 if you count the interim title, quite literally leaves him at the bottom of the list, right? And then again, the same thing at featherweight, or at lightweight, sorry. If you look at the guys that have fought that title, so Jens was the first champion, defended twice. Then Sean Shirk defended once. Then BJ Penn defended 3 times. Then Frankie Edgar, 2 defenses and a draw. Then Benson Henderson, 3 defenses. Anthony Pettis, 1 defense. Rafael dos Anjos, 1 defense. Eddie Alvarez was the first guy to not defend the title. So, arguably the worst lightweight champion that the UFC's had, who McGregor ended up taking the belt from, which doesn't look good, right? If you took it from I wouldn't really consider Alvarez the worst, just because he the work he did outside the UFC speaks for itself. But he took it from arguably the worst champion ever, and then loses it to Habib, who is the greatest champion ever. Although, well, actually, he was stripped and then he came back and lost to Habib. But yeah, he's in this position where he's one of only 6 guys now with Oliveira, but Oliveira will have a chance to defend, who's never defended the title. Eddie Alvarez probably will never win another UFC title because he's gone. But Tony Ferguson, Dustin Poirier, Justin Gaethje, all those guys have a chance to come back and get another title win. And if McGregor can't, and those guys come back, then that'll put them ahead of him. So McGregor's in a weird position where, when it comes to numbers at least, he's arguably the second worst lightweight champion ever, arguably the worst featherweight champion ever, and almost inarguably the worst double champ ever, right? Like, if you look at who the double champs have been, you have Henry Cejudo, who won the 125 and 135 pound title, defended both of them. Then you've got McGregor, who won 2 titles, never defended either. You've got Georges St. Pierre, who is the greatest welterweight of all time, and then won the middleweight title, although he never defended that. Just how much he did at welterweight really brings him up. And then you've got Cormier, who won the light heavyweight title, defended it 3 times, and then moved up to heavyweight, defended it once. Randy Couture, 2-time light heavyweight champion, 3-time if you count his interim title, 3-time heavyweight champion, had the most defenses ever at heavyweight until Stipe beat that record. So, McGregor's in a weird position where every accolade that he can have that is impressive also comes with the asterisk of worst to ever do it, right? And I don't think that sits well in his mind, right? Because, it's one thing to be remembered as, the most popular and richest fighter of all time. But when you're a guy like McGregor, who's like this hardcore competitor, that's not what you want to be seen as. You don't want to be seen as, the richest, most charismatic fighter ever. There is some positivity to it, but you don't want to only be seen as that, right? You want to be seen as one of the all-time greats. And with only 3 title wins, one of those being interim title, he's arguably the worst featherweight ever. We're not worst featherweight ever. Worst featherweight champion ever. Arguably the worst lightweight champion ever. I'd put him at number 2, second worst, behind Alvarez, but and almost unarguably, you'd have a hard time arguing any of the double champs are worse than him. Oh, Amanda Nunes, I forgot about her. 135, 145 women's, and has defended both those belts. So, it's just a rough spot for Conor to, if he goes out, I think, in terms of all-time greatness, he just won't be remembered as one of them. He'll be remembered 100%. Like, the dude is way too popular, way too charismatic, way too rich now to not be remembered. Like, he's not going to be one of these champions or everyone forgets about him in 10 years. And honestly, he might be overrated for the rest of his career just because how popular he was. We tend to see that a lot. I would argue that Habib, in terms of pound-for-pound rankings, is one of those guys who's constantly overrated because of how popular he was. I think Habib's the greatest lightweight of all time. But when you compare him to the runs like Anderson Silva went on, like St. Pierre went on, like even Randy Couture, who didn't, his was more hit and miss in a sense. Like, he won title fights and lost title fights and won title fights. I think people really focus too much on that 29-0 with Khabib, and they tend to overrate him because of that. But like, realistically, a lot of the first fights he fought weren't that great. I don't think he fought a guy with a winning record for his first 15 fights or something like that. So, I do think popularity will allow him to be slightly overrated. It even is now, right? But in terms of like the hardcore fans that actually, really follow the sport, and like, or even just somebody that like looks at a record book, right? Like, it's like, Conor McGregor, what records does he have? Like biggest gate, most pay-per-view buys. That's about it, right? I guess he was the first simultaneous 2-division champion. But yeah, like nothing that's pretty much the only accolade that he has in terms of. I guess the Jose Aldo knockout that was also impressive. One, just because it was Jose Aldo, but two, I think that was the fastest knockout in a title fight history. But being known for one or two fights in terms of all-time greatness isn't really that great, right? Like, this is St. Pierre. We have the Hughes trilogy, the two GSP or the two BJ Penn fights, the two Sarah fights, the Sean Shirk fight, Bisping fight. Like, he fought so many top guys and champions and just beat them all. And Conor obviously beat Aldo, beat Max when they were both much younger, so before Max became champion. He beat Eddie Alvarez, but three champions, to the 6 or 7 that St. Pierre beat, the 6 or 7 that Jones beat, the 6 or 7 that Anderson Silva beat. Like, Anderson fought, he beat Carlos Newton, he beat Rich Franklin twice, he beat Vitor Belfort, he beat Forrest Griffin. He beat a lot of the top guys. Dan Henderson, former Pride champion and UFC tournament champion. The longevity of the careers. I guess McGregor beat Poirier. I guess I forgot about Poirier for a second, but I think for McGregor, when he comes back, that's going to be the biggest thing for him. It's just this desire to be remembered as more than just a popular fighter, and to be remembered as one of the all-time greats, not just like a one-and-done champion who just kind of touched it but lost it. I think he wants to be, remembered as one of those all-time greats, and if he wants that, I think he's got to regain at least one of those titles, and then run with it. Because if he's off fucking around and dropping titles and like going and doing all these boxing matches and shit, it's not gonna bring the same level of greatness. It'll bring popularity, it'll bring money, but it won't bring greatness, right? Like, those are two different things. Demetrius Johnson is one of the most amazing, one of the greatest fighters of all time. And I think he sold over 100,000 pay-per-views twice, right? McGregor's popularity is not equal to his greatness. Or I should say his greatness is not equal to his popularity. His popularity is way above the level that his greatness should allow. At least in comparison to other athletes in the sport. I guess there's an argument that maybe those guys are just all less popular than they should be, especially Demetrius Johnson. I mean, it's almost a crime with that guy. And Stipe Miocic had the same problem too. Stipe is arguably the greatest heavyweight of all time, definitely the greatest heavyweight in the history of the UFC, and never really sold that well in the pay-per-views. Like, where are we here? Look at his pay-per-view belts. Yeah, so Verdum versus Miocic, 217,000. Miocic versus Overeem, 450,000. Miocic versus Dos Santos 2, 300,000. Miocic versus Ngannou, 350,000. Miocic versus Cormier, 380. Cormier 2, 450. Cormier 3, 500,000. So his record fight was the 500,000 fucking pay-per-view buys. Stipe versus Ngannou 2 might have sold better than that. I'm not sure. They haven't released the official numbers for it. But again, like, the fact that the guy who's arguably the greatest heavyweight champion of all time, and what's largely considered the most prestigious division just because it's the big boys, didn't sell well, right? Because he's just kind of a quiet fucking firefighter. But yeah, like, who would, in terms of greatness, like, Conor is clearly nowhere near Stipe. Conor is clearly nowhere near Demetrius Johnson, right? Like, you're talking about guys with 6-7 title wins, or 6 title wins in the case of Stipe. Fucking Demetrius has like 13 or 14, right? Conor has 2, 3 if you include his interim title, right? So there are, but he sold more in one pay-per-view than like those guys have in their careers combined. Right, like Conor's 2.4 million is almost literally as much as Stipe's entire career and Demetrius Johnson's career. I think combined together they sold like 2.8 million pay-per-views over the course of their entire career, and Conor was able to do that just in the Khabib fight, right? So greatness does not equate with popularity, and I think Conor wants greatness. He has popularity, now he wants greatness, and in order for him to get that, he's going to have to win that title again. He's going to have to win. I don't even think he has to beat Khabib. Everyone's like, oh, he's got to beat Khabib. Khabib's retired. He's got to beat Khabib. He's got to beat Khabib. I don't think that's true. Khabib's gone. Khabib's gone. You can only fight who's around. So if Conor's able to grab that title and prove that he's the best in the world and Khabib's not willing to come out and fight him, that's fucking Khabib's problem, right? Like, I think he can even, without beating Khabib, he can still become the greatest lightweight of all time. And I know a lot of people do not agree with that, but I think that's 100% true. If Conor wins that title and then goes on a long spree like St. Pierre or like Silva, which I don't think he will, mind you, but if he does do that, I think he will be considered a far greater lightweight than Khabib, even if Khabib doesn't come out of retirement. Right now, Khabib's got that solid, but, Conor's, he could do it. And it'll be interesting to see. But that's it for today.